Let me show you something worth noticing. You check your portfolio more than you check on your own progress. I've spent decades watching people interact with money, and there's a pattern I can't unsee anymore. The ones who stay poor aren't the ones who lack information. They're the ones who can't sit still. There's a habit that separates the people who build wealth from the people who just stay busy around it. And it's not what you think. It's the ability to do nothing, not in a lazy way, in a disciplined way. I've watched brilliant people destroy years of potential in a single afternoon because they felt like they had to do something. They had to act. They had to respond. They had to move. And that movement, that constant need to be involved, is what keeps them exactly where they are. Here's what I noticed early on. The market rewards patience, but it punishes waiting. And most people can't tell the difference. Patience is active. It's choosing not to act because you understand the game. Waiting is passive. It's frozen anxiety dressed up as discipline. I learned this the hard way. I used to think that being involved meant being engaged, that watching meant learning, that reacting meant I was sharp. But involvement isn't the same as progress. You can spend an entire year moving your money around and end up in the exact same place, or worse. The people I've seen build real wealth, the kind that compounds quietly over decades, they all share one trait. They're comfortable being bored, not excited, not stimulated, not validated by movement, just bored. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Most people can't handle boredom with their money because boredom with money feels like falling behind. You see someone else making a move. You read about a new opportunity. You hear about gains you didn't capture. And suddenly, doing nothing feels like losing. So you act, you trade, you pivot, you rebalance. You convince yourself it's strategy. But I've watched this play out hundreds of times. What looks like strategy is usually just discomfort dressed up as decision-making. The truth is, the market doesn't care about your need to feel productive. It rewards the people who can sit through silence. Let me show you what I mean. I knew someone years ago, sharp, educated, thoughtful. He had a plan. He'd done the research. He'd built a portfolio that made sense. And then he started checking it every day, sometimes twice a day, not because anything changed, because he couldn't resist. Within 6 months, he'd made 11 adjustments, small ones, tactical ones. Each one made sense in the moment. By the end of the year, his returns were worse than if he'd done absolutely nothing. Not because he was wrong, because he was involved. Here's the habit no one talks about. The wealthiest people I've known don't think about their money daily. They think about it deeply, and then they step back. They set it up. They let it work. They resist the urge to interfere because they understand something most people don't. Compounding needs silence to work. Every time you touch it, you restart the clock. Every time you move it, you interrupt the process. Every time you optimize, you trade long-term growth for short-term control. And control feels good, but it's expensive. I've seen people spend years trying to time the market, beat the average, find the edge, and the ones who succeed, they're not the ones who found a better system. They're the ones who realize the system doesn't need them. Think about it. You plant a seed, you water it, you give it sunlight, and then you leave it alone. You don't dig it up every week to check the roots. You don't rearrange the soil because you're anxious. You don't move it to a different spot because you heard about better sunlight somewhere else. You let it grow. Money works the same way, but we treat it like a dashboard, like a game, like something that needs our constant input to function. It doesn't. Here's what I've noticed about the people who stay stuck. They confuse activity with progress. They open their app, they read the news, they compare, they adjust, and every single one of those actions feels productive. It feels engaged. It feels responsible. But it's not building anything. It's just movement. And movement without direction is just noise. The ones who pull ahead, they're not smarter. They're not luckier. They don't have better information. They just have better behavior. They built a plan that makes sense. And then they did the hardest thing in finance. They left it alone. I've watched portfolios double, triple, grow into something unrecognizable, not because someone was brilliant, but because someone was absent. Absent in the right way. They didn't panic. They didn't optimize. They didn't chase. They just let time do what time does. And here's the part that stings. If you're reading this and thinking, I could never do that, you're not alone. Most people can't. Because doing nothing feels like giving up. It feels passive. It feels like you're not in control. But that's the paradox. The moment you try to control it, you lose control. I'll tell you what changed for me. I stopped checking, not because I didn't care, because I cared enough to let it work. I realized that every time I looked, I was asking the same question. Should I do something? And that question over time becomes expensive. Because sometimes the answer is no. But your brain doesn't like that answer, so it finds reasons to say yes. And those reasons sound smart. They sound measured. They sound like strategy. But they're just fear wearing a suit. Here's the habit. Set it. Forget it. Come back once a year. Not because you're careless, because you're disciplined. The people who build wealth aren't the ones watching the ticker. They're the ones living their lives while their money quietly compounds in the background. They're not less informed. They're less involved. And that difference is everything. I've seen people spend decades reacting to markets, chasing returns, optimizing allocations, and I've seen people spend decades ignoring their portfolio entirely. Guess which group ended up wealthier? It's not even close. The one habit that creates true wealth isn't action. It's restraint. It's the ability to build something sound and then trust it enough to leave it alone. Most people will never develop that habit because it requires something rare, the confidence to be bored. And if you can learn that, not just with money, but with everything, you'll be wealthier than most people ever get. Not because you did more, because you did less. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next.